evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to hour number 2 of this week's episode of the Nick and Joe Show, coming to you live from the Think Radio Broadcast Centre in Canada's national capital. And that would make it segment number 3. So if you're listening to the podcast, good Monday morning. And if you're just listening to us live, well, I guess that's just too high energy for it's too high energy for a Wednesday night, especially the week that we had to change the clocks. But if we're not going into that, we already dealt with that in the last segment, part 2. So yeah, that must be it, because we need to recuperate. Okay, so let's just turn Nick's microphone on. Okay, so that you don't think I'm just talking to myself, ladies and gentlemen. Nick was talking about recuperating. That was just not just my comment in the blue from, out of the whatever. Okay, I've totally lost my train of thought, Nick. Okay, so
let's get something to say once in a while.
Let's get serious here, okay? From time to time, things happen, and we comment on it. We bring it to people's attention, and one of the issues that we've talked about is the whole idea of gender transition, particularly hormone therapy and operations, etc., that are being given to young children, sometimes over the protest of their parents, because the child of whatever age thinks that maybe they're secretly a woman or a little girl in a little boy's body, or vice versa. And so there are places that you could go to receive hormone therapy or to subject your child to hormone therapy. And there was a case recently in British Columbia, and I don't know if it's ongoing still. I think there's still some items that have to be adjudicated. But there's a father whose child wanted to transition and has been given permission to transition. And if I stand to be corrected on this, Nick, but I think that the mother is supporting the child's decision and the father is not. And so this whole thing has been caught up in family court. The family is broken up over it, etc. The father continues to be very much opposed. I'm not aware of the child's age or a lot of the details. And one of the reasons is because there's a publication ban. So even if I had that information, even though it's the internet and it's unregulated, we still wouldn't be able to divulge that information publicly because of this publication ban that the court has imposed on the case. But the father of this child is refusing to follow the terms of the publication ban. And apparently now he has been placed under arrest and he is now in jail pending the judge's decision what, if anything, more to do to him. So I've sort of set that. That's the summary of where we are right now. But it opens up the whole question, I think, not just of should we be using our courts this way, but, at what point in time do parents have the right to say no to this kind of thing? When you're an adult, you can make these decisions for yourself, for better or worse. But you're not an adult. You're not even close to an adult. So, is this child abuse? Is this parent abuse?
My estimation is this is a father who is very afraid of the damage this will do his daughter. And, the kind of psychological, never mind the physical side, but the psychological damage it'll do. Let's not forget what kind of emotional trauma people who go through this process. They have one of the highest suicide rates in our culture, because they find out that changing the plumbing doesn't fix what's wrong. It's like if you have a car with a blown engine, you don't paint it, you change the engine. Or if your car is just rusty, changing the motor doesn't fix the rust. So they're identifying one problem but trying to solve another, and that leads to this huge upheaval within the mind of the individual. And when they still feel, they wake up and they still feel, 6 months, 8 months, 2 years later, miserable, they realized that the whole thing just was the wrong approach. And the father, being older and from my estimation, wiser, although I don't know about his tactics about how he's handling things in the court, he's just trying to protect his daughter from all this kind of a nightmare, because you don't need to go dig very far to find this information. Any amount of time on Google will bring you all you need to know about it. But as you pointed out, the deeper issue here is, why are we using our courts to undermine parental rights? Because this is the kind of case that I see this. It's a parental rights case. The child is still a minor. Therefore, unless there's actual physical harm going on, and by that I mean if the child is being physically abused and ending up in the hospital with bruises and broken bones or that kind of thing, some physical violence going on, or if there is extreme emotional violence going on, like this kind of thing, I don't classify as emotional violence. This is an emotional situation or a psychological situation that needs the help of a psychologist to talk these issues out and sort them out without having to go under the scalpel of the surgeon. Because, as I pointed out when I began my remarks, you have to fix what's wrong, not what you want to fix, just because you think it might make you feel better later. And in fact, all it does make you more miserable. So it's not the same thing. This is not the kind of family violence the court is in place to get rid of or to step in. Those are meant for extreme cases where parents and their children, start to hurt each other very physically and even threaten severe bodily harm, and those kind of things. But this is just a parent standing up and say, wait a minute, clearly this little girl was born a girl. And if there are problems with that, then we need to go inside we need to get her talking to somebody who can analyze the psychology, not the physiology. And we'll deal with that, and that will help her in the long run. And if the mother doesn't understand that, then she's just as wrong as the child in the court are.
And so it appears that there's this conflict in this case between the child's mother, and her father. The mother seems to be supportive. The father seems to be against. So it certainly introduces a whole different element, if you will, to the question about what the court should be doing. And I frankly don't envy a judge having to make these kinds of decisions in such a fundamental conflict between a husband and wife and a mother and father. But I think that what really bothers me, what troubles me, is that the decision of the court has gone, rather than erring on the side of caution, which I think in this case would be to say, we're going to follow what the father has to say here, and we're going to tell this young lady, look, whatever your feelings are, okay, this is the way it is, and we'll try to get you some help. And presumably the father is going to try to get the child some help. But one way or the other, you're not an adult. You don't get to make these decisions. And so I'm troubled by what I perceive to be the ease with which the court has sided with the mother in this case rather than the father.
Yeah, I guess that's, in a roundabout way, that's the same thing I'm saying. Like, I'm not trying to pit the husband against the wife. And there may be something going on behind the scenes where there's animosity between the two that's being played out here. We don't know that, because a lot of times in the case of separation and divorce, it can get really ugly. And for all we know, this may be playing a role in this all. At the same time, we don't know that it is. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind that is also a possibility. But the bottom line is, it's like a doctor used to have to promise not to do no harm. I think that a judge is bound by the same kind of situation when it comes to minors. that he is not allowed to do harm. And by putting him into this method of treatment, if you want, you're doing far more harm and exposing him to a much greater risk than you would be. And I even take out the suicide issue or the mental health issue, the risk of that kind of surgery, of infection or things going wrong. I mean, medical science is a science, but it's not a perfect one. And what happens if things go wrong? I mean, who's gonna explain to the child why they've been disfigured in this way, and now their life is even more miserable than it was before? And it's got nothing to do with what they were thinking of. It's just something happened, something went wrong during surgery. There's nobody even considering these things, and you would think that somebody on the bench would say, wait a minute, there's all kinds of risks here. If you look at it from a business point of view, you do a cost-benefit analysis, right? When cost-benefit, cost-risk, where you weigh the risks versus the benefits, and you try to be as thorough as that as you can. So what you have now is a judge saying, well, there's certain risks we'll accept and certain ones we don't. But he's not the one that has to live with the consequences if something goes wrong. And that's something else that's just kind of occurred to me while we're sitting here talking about this, is the judges are making decisions for people that have lifelong consequences. Now, in the criminal court, they do that all the time, but usually that's with adults, not with children who are so confused that they don't know what gender they are. All you can do is make a bad decision in that case if you're not deciding to get the child some psychological help rather than sedation and a surgeon's knife. It just, to me, I can't see how anyone could come to that conclusion.
Well, more and more people are, but not so much in England. There was a court case recently that we talked about on one of our previous shows where the court was saying where some children who are now adults were suing a clinic that had subjected them willingly on the part of the child and the part of the parents. They were quite happy at the time getting a hormone treatment, and then later on, when they got a little older, having gender reassignment surgery. And they came back and they sued this clinic for having done the hormone therapy and not really been clear as to what the risks were, whether physically or psychologically. And I'm not familiar with all of the elements of the case, but the court sided with the plaintiffs in this case, and it sort of has set off a bit of an earthquake in England, because now all of a sudden the medical establishment, at least those who have been supporting gender reassignment and supporting hormone therapy for young children in particular, are having to rethink whether or not that's a sound medical practice, and indeed whether or not it's going to be moving forward a legal medical practice. So those are open questions now in the United Kingdom, but not so much here. I mean, everybody seems to think that it's a settled issue. But I come back to what I think is the probably the best example that I can come up with of what we're talking about here and how ideology has seeped into the whole debate. There are a number of mental illnesses out there that have to do with rejecting psychologically, emotionally, parts of your body. And so there are patients out there who insist that they cannot live with one of their arms or both of their arms, that they need to have their arms or their legs or other body parts amputated for their mental health. There was one famous case not that far back where a woman insisted that for her mental health she had to be rendered